And I'm also going to be letting everyone in from the waiting room. Hi, folks. Welcome to our talk this evening. We will be getting started at 7:30, so just hang on for a few more minutes. Hi, folks. It's 7:30, so we will get started now. I am Vivian New, I'll be your host tonight, and we are going to have a great talk from Jane Rieder on California ethnobotany, and it's a talk for learners of all ages. But before we get started with Jane's talk, I want to give you a little bit of an introduction to our chapter. But first, I want to acknowledge that the work done by the Santa Clara Valley chapter of CNPS lies in the homeland of the Muwekma Ohlone, the Amamutsin tribal band, the Tamiya Nation, and the Ramayatush Ohlone, who still live and thrive in this area today. We hope to learn from them and support their work to restore traditional practices and heal from historical trauma. And welcome to our talk tonight. If this is your first time at one of our talks, we would really love to know how you found out about us and where you are. So if you don't mind, please share that in chat. Our talks are the work of a team, not just me and not just the speaker. So tonight we have me. I'm going to be your host. I'm also taking care of the technology behind the scenes. And our QA moderator is Stephanie Morris, and she's also our YouTube moderator. So as the talk is going on, you're always welcome to ask questions, but not out loud. Just type them into chat, and Stephanie will be watching the chat on both YouTube and on Zoom, and she will relay your questions to Jane at the appropriate time. If you are not familiar with the California Native Plant Society, we are a nonprofit environmental organization. We were founded in 1965, and we have over 11,000 members in 35 chapters. Our chapters are spread over the entirety of California, the state, but we also go beyond the bounds of the state and the country because we have a chapter in Baja California as well. Our chapter is the Santa Clara Valley chapter, and we cover Santa Clara County and southern San Mateo. And the CNPS mission is to save California's native plants and their habitats by bringing together science, education, conservation, and gardening. If you're not currently a member, we would love to have you join us. In addition to supporting things like this talk tonight, as a member, you get some wonderful benefits. You get two, not just one, but two magazines, Artemisia, which provides a lot of great articles with more of a scientific bent about native plants and their habitats. And you get this gorgeous, gorgeous Flora magazine, which has lots of general interest and absolutely beautiful pictures of native plants and the insects and other animals that use them. You'll also receive our Blazing Star chapter newsletter, which will tell you about what's going on around here and also has articles of local interest. And you get discounts at participating local nurseries. So if you're not currently a member, please do consider joining. It's very easy to do that. If you have a QR code reader, you could just point it at that QR code and it'll take you right to the page to join. Otherwise, just type in cnps.org/join and you can join online. We have some upcoming chapter events. There's a field trip to the Bonnie Doon Ecological Reserve in Santa Cruz County on May 25th at 10 in the morning. It's open to all. You don't have to be a chapter member to join that one. And you can find out more about it on our meetup page. There's either go to meetup.com and look for our chapters page, or you can use that QR code to find us. We also have a photo group meeting at the end of the month, the last Friday. So if you are a photographer or if you just enjoy looking at pictures of beautiful plants, you can join the photo group meeting. It is on Zoom at 7 o'clock on the last Friday or the fourth Friday of every month. And you can find out more about it at meetup.com. And all of this is also announced weekly on the chapter news mailing list. And I will tell you how to join that in just a moment. But before that, our chapter has a nursery. You can buy your plants online, and our online store will reopen on Sunday, this upcoming Sunday. It'll only be open for a week, and that's actually the last time it's going to be open until fall because the place that we're located, Hidden Villa, is closed for the summer to the public during the summer. So this is your last chance to buy plants from us before summer. You can either have your plants delivered or you can pick them up, schedule a pickup at the nursery before the end of the month. And all the proceeds from our sales go to benefit our chapter and, again, support activities like this talk. In addition to plants, we have t-shirts and books and lots of other things. If you enjoy the Going Native Garden Tour and you saw those wonderful Buckeye t-shirts, we will be carrying them in the store this time. So I'm just adding that to the store right now. There's a bunch of other great plants that I'm just adding. So if you're looking for plants, I suggest getting on Sunday or Monday because there's a few that are very limited quantities. And as I mentioned before, there's a email news list where you get a weekly notice about the things that are going on in the chapter. So if you're not currently subscribed, I would suggest joining. It's a great way just to figure out what's going on and get notices when we schedule more talks, which we are in the process of doing right now. And to do that, you just, it's a Google group, so you can send an email to this thing on the screen, or you can just go to our website, cnps-scb.org, and there's information on how to do that right on the front page. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Please mute your microphones. In fact, I think I'll just go ahead and make sure everybody's muted right now. You are welcome to ask questions anytime if just by typing them into the chat box. And as mentioned, Stephanie is going to be monitoring that both on YouTube and on Zoom, and will ask your questions to Jane when she's ready to take them. And we do expect to finish by 9 o'clock. As I mentioned before, this is both on YouTube and on Zoom, and is recorded on YouTube, so you can watch it immediately afterwards or anytime later on. Okay, we're just about ready for Jane now. I want to introduce her. When Jane was 2 years old, her parents called her the baby botanist, so she thinks that it's fair to say that she is a lifelong lover of plants. As an adult, she uses her knowledge and interest in plants in her roles as a high school teacher, a high school botany teacher, a parent, a gardener, a hiker, an amateur scientist, and a cook. She loves teaching, and I am really looking forward to hearing what she has to say about California ethnobotany. So take it away, Jane.
All righty, will do. So let me go ahead and work on sharing my screen here. Thank you for your introduction. All right. So as Vivian said, I'm Jane Rieder. I teach high school botany here in the Bay Area, and also have been a lover of plants since I was very small. We would go to the park and I would ignore the swings, ignore the slide, and pick plants and sometimes eat them. So there's actually a lot of plants in California that I probably shouldn't know what they taste like, but I do. Awesome. I'm really excited to be here. I love talking about plants. I love teaching about plants. And yeah, this is really an exciting thing for me. So when Steph invited me to speak, I was told that it would be mainly a program for kids and teens. And then I modified it to be for learners of all ages. And so I have a lot of, I would say, audience participation type questions that I wanted to ask. And so I want to start by asking folks, what is botany? Feel free to put some thoughts in the chat. I can see the Zoom chat directly. I can't see the YouTube chat myself at the moment, but Steph is monitoring that. So what is botany? Awesome. Study of plants. Fabulous. All right. As I showed here, it comes from a Greek word that ultimately comes actually from a word that means grazing or pasturage. And so botany is plant science, basically. Botanists would study the physiology and structures of plants, the ways that they make the structures that they need to make, the ways that they communicate both within the plant, passing nutrients and water, all of that, and also there's plants that can communicate to nearby plants. Ecological relationships between species, genetics of plants. There's a whole subfield of botany that's just about taxonomy and making sure that plants are categorized according to species and genus correctly. Classification of new species, plant behavior, etc. So botanists study a lot of different fascinating things. Okay, so if that's botany, what is ethnobotany? And so once again, we have a Greek root here, ethnos. And I'm wondering, what are some thoughts in the chat of what is ethnobotany? I have it on the slide here as well. But I'm wondering if anybody has Excellent. Yeah, how people use plants. I'm wondering if anyone has an example of a way that their family or their cultural group uses plants for either medicine or any kind of use that is. Does anybody forage? Or I often hear my students, my high school students will often say, oh, my grandmother used to do this thing. Yeah, excellent. So decorative uses of plants, boughs of evergreen, holly, collecting plants for holidays, right? Got it. Medicinal plants. I feed my children mint tea when they have upset stomachs. That's an example of ethnobotany. We had a neighbor when I was a kid who would go to the canyons in San Diego and go and pick the wild mustard greens and eat them. So I think she made ravioli out of them. It's kind of amazing. It was the first time I'd ever considered that anything in this sort of wild environment could possibly be edible. Great, yeah, miner's lettuce and salads. Yeah, fascinating, right? All kinds of specific woods for musical instruments, guitars, right? Need very, precise types and quality of wood. Excellent, yeah. So ethnobotany basically is the marriage of anthropology, the study of cultures, and botany, the study of plants. It's the study of how cultural groups use plants. Yeah, excellent. Baskets. We're going to talk about baskets. Yes. So the knowledge, traditions, and uses of plants in a specific cultural group. And so obviously that usually focuses on the native plants of the area inhabited by the culture being studied. Yeah, my daughter and my family are watching on YouTube, and Ada says, like when I use cough drops. Yeah, if you have cough drops that have herbal ingredients, that would be an example of an ethnobotany. Great. So sure, how different ethnicities have used plants. Excellent. So another sort of audience participation question here. What does it mean to tend a garden or farm? In other words, if you think about gardening or farming, what are all of the things that people have to do in order to discourage some kinds of plants that might be unwanted and encourage other kinds of plants to grow? What are some examples there? Excellent. Yep. Yeah. Watering, pulling up weeds. Fertilizing is a really important one. Excellent. Yeah. So knowing what you want to encourage, right? The knowledge that goes into planning your garden or farm, what plants are going to do well at that site. Excellent. Yeah. Culling fruit. So potentially thinning. Controlled burning. I love that you said that. Yes. Thank you. Yeah. That's a really important one, right? That I don't think, at least I, as a gardener, have never practiced a controlled burn in my garden. But that's a very important one. Yeah. Excellent. Yep. Pruning. Elderberry flower fritters. Yum. Excellent. Yeah. Yeah. And suppressing bugs is a big one too, right? So making sure that we're, controlling possible pests, both plant pests like weeds and animal pests like insects or other potential like plant predators. Excellent. Cool. So those are all things that, excellent. Yeah. Releasing or fostering beneficial insects and making sure in general that you're sort of tending to the ecological health of the site that you're farming or gardening, right? So those are all things that, yeah, I guess. that California Native people actually did and practiced. And we'll talk a little bit more as I get into more plant examples of exactly how they did that and why. But all of those techniques are things that California Native cultures actually did and still do. Another sort of important thing to talk about as we talk about ethnobotany in California is that California has somewhat of a unique geology and a unique type of soil profile, right? So California has relatively large concentration of what's called serpentine soil. Serpentine soil is found in small geological pockets all over the world, but it's pretty unique in California because serpentine soil has kind of, relative to what most plants kind of prefer, it has an imbalance of nutrients. So just like humans, plants need calcium, plants need iron, plants need certain other minerals. And just like humans, if they have an imbalance of minerals, they can be unhealthy or fail to thrive in that particular site. Serpentine here at the bottom right, this is actually the state rock of California, and you can see it's got kind of a characteristic green gray sort of a color. So soils that are that color, it's probably a good suspicion that they might be a serpentine soil. And I read a paper about sort of a report about serpentine soils. Basically, the main defining characteristic is that these soils are relatively heavier in magnesium and iron than in calcium. So most soils kind of are tilted toward the calcium side, and that's what most plants have evolved to really thrive in. Serpentine soils have more magnesium, more iron, and also more heavy metals, chromium, manganese, nickel, cobalt, and copper. And so those are potential sources of metal toxicity to plants, right? They kind of like overdose on an element that they don't prefer. So what that's led to is that there are plants which have evolved specifically to thrive in those sites. Some of those plants are what's called tolerators, meaning they're kind of pinch hitters. They can sort of switch back and forth. And be able to thrive in a serpentine site or in a site that has more typical soil chemistry. And others are endemic to serpentine sites. And endemic means a plant or animal, right, which is native to a certain well-defined area and only lives within that area. Oftentimes we use the word endemic when we talk about islands, actually, right? So there's plants and animals that are endemic to, say, New Zealand or the Hawaiian Islands, because that's a very well-defined area. But the same thing is true for serpentine pockets in California. Near the Bay Area, serpentine soils are found on Mount Tam, Mount Diablo, and San Mateo County, Pulgas Ridge, Edgewood Park, Jasper Ridge near Stanford, and Metcalf Canyon in the Morgan Hill area. And then there's some other sort of smaller serpentine islands. These two plants here, I believe, are both actually tolerators of serpentine soil rather than being endemic. This is Tritolea laxa, or ethereal spear, that can grow in either type of soil. And this one here is, I believe, is Calochortus luteus, yellow Mariposa lily. Really beautiful flower. So given California's vast diversity, and for folks who've really traveled throughout the state, you know that it goes from Death Valley to the Redwoods, to the coast, the Chaparral, to the high mountains, Mount Lassen, Mount Shasta. We have a vast diversity of different ecosystems within California, right? And that actually led to and fostered a vast diversity of native cultures and groups. So I have a map here. This is by Tamara Lota Link, and it shows many of the, I would say, like broad cultural groups that have inhabited California. If you're in the South Bay area, or most of the Bay, right up into Contra Costa County, you're on Ohlone land, as Vivian mentioned. If you're in the North Bay, you're probably on Coast Miwok land in Marin County and Sonoma. And then you can see all of the different cultural groups throughout California. Keep in mind that within this, the original political units actually could be quite small, maybe just a few families who traditionally would live within a fairly small area, and maybe they would be part of a somewhat larger overall cultural group. So this map could even be broken down further into much smaller categories, as you can see these sort of like smaller type here. The history of Spanish and European in general colonization and contact with these native cultures is quite long. So initial contact with Spanish explorers happened probably as early as the mid 16th century. So like 1542, I believe, is the date I saw. And mostly that was just ships that docked briefly on the coast as they kind of journeyed up and down. They didn't get into the interior as much. After consolidation of Spanish power in what is now Mexico, the Spanish government there sent missionaries north into Alta California, what's now California, to found missions. And so the Spanish mission system founded missions in the later 18th century mostly. And that included many heads of non-native livestock. So cattle, sheep, goats, horses, pigs. And one of the big impacts of that was that these animals actually overgrazed and caused ecological imbalances, and also introduced a lot of non-native plants, either through manure that they had, eaten fodder on board a ship, and that was the cause of non-native introduction of plant, or just by the actual, deliberate introduction by the Spanish. So what happened with that, it put a lot of pressure on the ecosystems that the native people needed to survive. And so unfortunately, in addition to sort of the history of native people being forced into labor on the missions farms, they also, in some cases, were almost driven to the missions to survive because of this ecological degradation that was happening because of all these introduced species. After Mexican independence from Spain, yeah, thank you. Thank you, Steph, for that. Oops, sorry. After Mexican independence from Spain, the missions were largely replaced by what was called ranchos, and native people in that time frame were promised a share of the land, but in practice they actually were not and did not end up being given anything. So they typically ended up working on the land for European or Californio landowners, Californios meaning the Mexican and Spanish descendants that were in California at that point. And then only about 20 to 30 years later, the Mexican-American War happened. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo that was signed to end that war occurred within about 2 weeks of the discovery of gold within California. And so at that point, of course, there was a huge influx of settlers from all over the world coming to hopefully make their fortunes in gold. And that, of course, put further pressure on the land and the watersheds. Panning for gold really disrupts the stream ecosystems, introduces a lot of mud and silt into the water, and that caused a collapse in salmon and trout fisheries that a lot of native people needed to survive. So again, another sort of ecological component of the disaster of colonization that unfortunately made it untenable for a lot of tribes to continue living in the traditional ways. Many of the native cultures and ecosystems and physical bodies of people were destroyed in that contact. Many tribes, however, have survived and are actually working to still today to maintain and revive their cultural traditions and languages. So it's a very long and complex history that we're talking about. As I mentioned, the impacts of these invasive species, and so I have a few images here. I just took these the other day in Rancho San Antonio, so you can see this wild oat here, Avena species, and then I think these might be bromes. And here we have some Italian thistle, it looks like. Over here, more brome species, and then of course our wild mustard. So lots and lots of introduction of non-native plants that caused this ecological disruption. Particularly important in that were these annual grasses, right? So the native grasses of California typically were perennial bunch grasses that would grow throughout the year, and provide sort of food for native antelope and elk. And when those annual grasses came in, they would sort of zoom up as soon as the winter rains happened and take the water and nutrients away from those perennial grasses. And so most of the grasslands in California now look more like this than they do like they would have prior to contact with those non-native species. I wanted to pause for some questions. I feel like I've been talking for a while. Got it. Yeah, well, endemic, I believe, is also from Greek. So it would mean within a population or inside a specific demos, people. And so I wonder if that's why the two meanings have sort of gone in those different directions. All right, if there are questions and you want to put them in the Zoom chat or on YouTube, that would be lovely. I will continue with a little note here. And this is information that I feel like was fairly new to me when I learned it in 2010. And since then, I've heard more people sort of discussing this. So I think this is coming to be more well known. Most California native plants evolved in a landscape where lightning strikes or volcanic activity could cause frequent, small, low intensity fires that would burn through their habitat. I think studies say an average of maybe every 10 to 15 years, obviously a wide range depending on exactly where you are in the state. And so what that meant, because those fires were fairly low in intensity, older, more established trees would be protected by their bark and be able to regrow. Maybe some smaller trees, and of course, any annuals or perennial grasses, smaller plants would burn and leave open spaces into which then a succession of plants could regrow. So the natural fire regimen that native people evolved in and that the plants and animals of the area evolved in kind of would leave sort of a patchy landscape. Open, oh, such a great question. Thank you. So small, small stands of trees, open space in between, mixed ages of different trees in the landscape. And that was something that native people adapted themselves really well to. And what they learned how to do over time was actually a series of controlled burns. And depending on what they were managing that specific area of land for, the burning regimen could be as little as every 2 years up to maybe 5 to 10 years, depending on what they were trying to manage. So burning for, say, deer grass, probably something like every 2 years. A berry patch might be a longer regimen of, say, 5 to 8 years. And of course, what that means is it gives these desired results of more space for certain types of plants to grow. It helps certain plants grow in desirable ways. So for instance, burning back a hazel bush or mock orange will cause shoots that are more straight to grow from the kind of bowl of the plant. And then it also returns nutrients to the soil. So it's an important part of sort of the original fire ecology of the state. When Europeans arrived and when people started wanting to build houses in places where maybe it was not as sustainable to do. Totally, yeah, thank you. The new normal about 125 years ago became total fire suppression. Think like Smokey Bear, right? And so unfortunately, what that's meant is that that's kind of given the trees like 125-year head start. And so if you drive through areas near Mount Lassen, let's say, or near Tahoe, you'll see just a very dense, tree, like pencils lined up in a box, right? And what that means is that when fires do start in those areas, there's really nothing to kind of prevent them from just spreading through the whole stand. And so it means that fires begin, they're starting to burn the available fuel and they can quickly spread and grow much hotter. Obviously, climate change plays a huge role in that as well. But forestry professionals actually are kind of recognizing now the wisdom of native peoples and, natural sort of fire ecology of California, this patchy landscape that wouldn't really allow a large fire to kind of sweep through hundreds of thousands of acres as we're seeing now. I saw a couple questions. Yeah, thank you, Lyndon. I actually have it right here. And it's part of the reading. Rosie asks, is there a focus on controlling some of these non-natives, or are they just part of the habitat? I would say it's a mixed bag. I mean, so I guess my big answer would be most of these invasive species are just part of the habitat. However, within limited areas, there is sometimes a focus on, let's try to restore this small area to what would be more close to kind of a pre-contact or a more natural, evolutionarily, stable sort of ecosystem, right? I would say, if you go to Pulgas Ridge, if you go to the Palo Alto Baylands, you'll occasionally see volunteers there actually going and removing some of those non-native plants. Are they ever going to be totally gone from our state? Not really possible, but within small areas that we're trying to maintain or restore as much as possible, there's sort of an effort to try to do that. My personal approach in my garden is sort of just like getting the numbers to trend down. I'm never going to fully remove the burr shirtle from the garden, but I can pull as many as possible to reduce the seed bank for the following year. Is it known what the ratio was pre-contact between lightning fires and native peoples burning? I'm not sure. Yeah, that's a great question. I've read a study that, they can do like tree ring studies where they can see scars from fires. And that's where I got the 11-year sort of average, because they could kind of see on average this old tree every 11 years or so had sort of fire marks. But I don't know, what the ratio would be between the two. Yeah, great question. Sorry, I don't have such a revelatory answer. Also true, yeah, for sure. All right. Got it. So we've talked a little bit about sort of the history of and cultures of California, the ecology, all of these pieces. And so I wanted to kind of get into like the sort of meat of the talk. So, when I was in 4th grade and I was learning about California history, I was taught that the California Native people were hunter-gatherers. And isn't that nice? And I think that for a lot of us sort of conjures up images of, people kind of randomly foraging through the woods and picking berries. And and I've certainly done my share of picking berries on hikes and whatever, right? But I think the way that we conceive of that is very, what would I say, culturally determined, right? And so when Spanish explorers initially came to California, and other European groups later on, what they saw was what looked like wilderness, right? A wild, unmanaged landscape. They didn't see straight rows of olive trees. They didn't see vineyards. They didn't see sort of traditional, what they would think of as cultivation. And so to them, this is totally wild land. And because the lifestyle and cultures, the ethnobotanical practices were unfamiliar, I think it was easy for them to miss the level of commitment to tending the ecosystems that the native cultures had. So unfortunately, like the Spanish explorers sort of didn't really see what was going on, right? Because I think there was this very binary idea of it's either agricultural, civilized, or it's wilderness, untouched, untrammeled by human, whatever, right? So these are a couple of images and that I want to go into a little more detail about. So the Edward S. Curtis collection. Edward S. Curtis was a photographer who took a lot of pictures of native people throughout North America, actually, in the early part of this century. Or sorry, early part of last century. I'm old. So this is a woman from the Cahuilla tribe in Southern California harvesting fruit from these California fan palms. And these trees were very carefully tended. An individual family might have a specific stand that was sort of their traditional place to gather, possibly irrigated, maybe even planted in specific spots to provide fruit. They would carefully kind of remove any brush from the area around, both to, prevent fire damage to those trees, but also possibly to give a little bit more nutrients and light just specifically to the trees. And the fruit here, the fruit is edible, and also the seeds of this plant can be ground into kind of flour. The fronds can be used to make shelters or baskets. So this is a very culturally important tree to that group of people. Over here, this is a Poma woman harvesting Pinol. We'll talk about what that is in a second. You can see that she has a basketry beater here with a larger basket that she's collecting into. And this is a really important sort of part of the diet. While collecting these seeds, she would be saving and making sure that some of them are present in the soil for the following year. And patches of certain plants also, there's evidence that they were irrigated or tended in other ways. So it's a really important part of the diet. All right. I wanted to pause for questions, and also my last little audience participation bit. What do people use plants for? What are all the things that we use plants for? We've mentioned a few already, right? So musical instruments, decoration, medicine. I'd love to just get a bunch of thoughts in the chat. Sure, yeah. Steph wants me to repeat the name of the book. A commenter on YouTube mentioned this book. It's called Tending the Wild, M. Cat Anderson, who's kind of one of the experts on California ethnobotany. All right, excellent. Yeah, I'm seeing some great comments. Food, paper, building materials, medicine, beauty, cooling the landscape. I love that you said that. There's an important, I think, aspect here, which is what we call ecosystem services, right? That plants actually provide stability and health to our ecosystems. Great, yeah, boats, tea, berries, baskets, pencils. Yep, excellent. One of the Yes, spoken like a landscape architect. Excellent. Yeah, Steph says blocking or opening views. Yeah, so we use plants in our gardens for aesthetic reasons. I want to put a hedge up to block out my neighbor's whatever, or I want to cut down this tree so that I can see the beautiful view of the valley, right? All of those things. Excellent. Yeah, I want to go back for a second to Carol's comment here of cooling the landscape. Celebrations, definitely. One of the big ecosystem services, excuse me, that's really, I think, sort of what would I say? Like an easy example in this area is the marshes around the bay are actually really important, and the health of those ecosystems of native cord grasses and salicornia, the pickleweed species, because that can help prevent flooding and help kind of buffer the land a little bit against unusual like storm surge or whatever of water. Yeah, spirituality, cordage. Yeah, spirituality, ritual, utensils, shelter. Excellent, excellent. Yep, awesome. So here's a list. This is not an exhaustive list, but I kind of came up with these, and I'm going to talk about roughly one plant per sort of category here. So food, including food for animals, right? So obviously if you're going to eat meat, we got to feed them somehow, or they need to feed themselves somehow if we're hunting or fishing. Mulch, shelter, fuel, so firewood. All right, my husband is quoting from what is that? Is that from it's that Shel Silverstein book, right? I'm not remembering it. Anyway, medicine, dye, art, decoration, so aesthetic uses, fiber, baskets, clothing, and anything else that you need fiber for, right? Cordage would be a great example. Tools and or weapons, and then ritual or religious uses. As I said, I'm planning to talk about roughly one type of plant per category, but obviously there's so many different plant species in our state and so many different cultural groups that use them in different ways, and have fully explored and utilized all of this amazing biological diversity. So obviously I would never be able to share every plant in every category, and I chose a few that are either very important or that really kind of foreground some of the management techniques and practices that California Native people use to help those plants and encourage them. Another thing to keep in mind is many of the plants I'm going to talk about have multiple uses, depending on the culture, depending on the giving tree. There we go. Excellent. That's a great question, Rosie. I'm getting there. Depending on the culture, one culture might have used a particular plant in one way or another. And also many of the plants that I'll talk about have multiple useful aspects, right? So maybe a plant that produces fiber also is used medicinally, or a plant that has edible fruit also might have ritual uses or whatever. So there's multiple different categories. There we go, the giving tree. Excellent. All right. So you'll remember from a few minutes ago this image of this Pomo woman collecting pinole. Pinole basically just means edible seeds of various plant species. And obviously, if you're in the Bay Area, you'll recognize Pinol as the name of a town in Contra Costa County. And it comes from this word for these edible seeds. Oftentimes, those would be made into kind of like a porridge, or possibly also sort of ground and roasted as like a bread. Kind of the big three would be red maize, Calandrinia species, chia, and a closely related species is the chia that you might have in your house as like a superfood today, right? That one's actually a Mexican species, but this is closely related. And then tarweed, and tarweed actually could encompass species of several different genera, so Madia and also Hemizonia species. But these are kind of the biggest three. As the gatherers, typically women, would gather, instead of, say, cutting the whole seed head, instead of mowing down the whole plant, they use this beating or tapping motion sort of strategically, because that would allow only the truly ripe seed to actually fall into the basket. And that means that you might be able to come back when more of the seed is ripe and actually gather more later on. It also eliminates the possibility of waste. So you wouldn't want to waste anything. And there's a very strong ethic of all California native cultures that says you only take as much as you need. You need to make sure to leave some for the next generation, and also for other species that might need it. There's a very strong kind of cultural, not quite a taboo, but a cultural disincentive to waste anything. It takes a lot of skill also to winnow these seeds, because most of the seeds are pretty close in size and weight to the chaff that you want to get rid of. So, if you think about sort of threshing wheat or whatever, right? You're tossing it up in the air, the wheat grains are much heavier, the chaff blows away, and you're left with the grain. That's not so much the case with these type of seeds, because they're just about as light as the chaff you're trying to get rid of. So it takes a lot of skill. An ethnobotanist whose talk I heard a few years ago said that she was in awe of the skill and the ability to do this of the native people. In addition to these three, there's many kinds of plants that have edible seeds. And so these are kind of just the three that almost every cultural group in California used at least one of these different plants for seed. And there's some record that some of the chia patches were actually irrigated as well. All right. Another important use that we discussed is shelter. And so obviously many different species of plants. I'm not sure if chia is local to us. I want to say it might be more in the eastern half of California. Although I'm sure it would be possible to cultivate. I believe it's a perennial essentially like in the sage genus, right? It's a salvia. Oh, nice. Cool. I didn't know that. I've never seen it. Excellent. Shelter, tule reeds are found in freshwater marsh habitats throughout California. I know. And particularly in the Central Valley. So a lot of areas in the Central Valley used to have a lot more freshwater marshland. And these reeds can be bunched together to make canoes or rafts. So they're sort of tied in a bundle kind of a shape. Also, obviously, can be woven to make these large mats. So this is a shelter, or make a floor mat. There's a variety of different ways to use these reeds. Notice that another use of this plant is that these seeds are also edible. So it's another form of pinol. And the tubers, the rhizomes, I'm actually not sure if it's technically a tuber or a rhizome that this grows from, are also edible, somewhat like maybe sort of a yucca type thing, would be roasted potentially or ground into flour. Medicinal plants, many different medicinal plants. And these are two species that I wanted to sort of focus on a bit, partly because fascinatingly, these are medicinal plants that members of this genus actually are used all over the world for medicinal uses. The compound artemisinin, derived from a Eurasian plant, is actually one of the most important anti-malarial drugs now today, discovered by a researcher in China, I believe in the 80s. And we have 3 native Artemisia species in California. We have here, this one I believe is Artemisia californica, the coastal sagebrush. You can see it's kind of got little thread-like leaves. This is a very familiar plant, kind of up and down the California coast, chaparral type environments. And here we have Artemisia douglassiana, the California mugwort, it's sometimes called, and you can see sort of these pronged leaves, so a little more broad, and then mountain sagebrush. Artemisia tridentata is the last one, and that one grows more on the eastern half of the state. They mainly were used, you could make a tea for like a cough or cold, so any kind of respiratory illness, also for pain, and kind of a cleansing body wash for wounds. So you could make sort of a tea out of it as well and sort of pour it on anything, any wounded area. They are, if you've ever like rubbed the leaves between your hands and then kind of smelled, they smell kind of minty medicinal. And it's odd because it's actually both are members of the sunflower family. So they're not actually related to a mint, but they have this very fresh kind of cough drop like smell. I think it's quite pleasant, but it's rather strong. Another couple of uses here, dried leaves could be used as an insect repellent, and the fresh leaves sometimes would be chewed for toothaches. So sort of a analgesic property there. Another use, so we talked a little bit about dye, and this is, I have to confess, this is actually not a very important dye plant for California Native people, but my daughter and I did do some hand dyeing, and so the shirt I'm currently wearing is dyed with Northern California black walnut hulls. Excellent. So these Northern California black walnuts, dark brown or black dye can be made from these. And so you can see this is what they look like at this season. They're still quite small. And later in the season, they actually fall from the tree, and you can see sort of these, the walnut itself, the shell is actually inside sort of a spongy layer, and it's that layer that provides the dye. This is a picture of the tree itself, so you can see they get quite large. Obviously, the nuts are also edible, so that's another use of this plant. And there's a related species in Southern California, the Southern California black walnut. There's also a use of basket making with the bark. So the inner bark of this tree is also can be used for making baskets. All right, another one is deer grass. So you can see amazing examples of both old and contemporary basket work. I believe this one is from the Oakland Museum of California. And this is a perennial native grass. The leaves and flower stalks can be picked for basket making in any season. And so Native people actually burn burn the area. And what that allows is the new flower stalks can come up, and they're more straighter, stronger, more appropriate for basket making. This is another of these perennial bunch grasses that California has throughout its ecosystems, and so it's an important basket making material, and one of the ones that was managed primarily by burning. Deer grass, of course, is not the only basket making material. So there's many, many, many different ones, and I found a not exhaustive list. Native basket makers use California lilac, milkweed, agave, honeysuckle. We have a native honeysuckle species in the Bay Area and throughout California. Dogwood, giant chain fern, common rush, those are Juncus species, maidenhair ferns, sedges, yucca, tule, western redbud, white alder, mock orange, and willow. And so depending on exactly the element that you are trying to make, the color, etc., and depending on the purpose and size of the intended basket. Yeah, great, thank you. How strong it needs to be. Does it need to be watertight? Different decorative elements. A basket maker might choose from many different species. Some types of basket making plants would need to be gathered in a specific season. As also that's true for the walnuts as well, right? You would gather the hulls in the season when they're kind of the readiest to use for dye, which would be throughout the summer. Others can be picked in any season. So the deer grass is one that could be gathered in any season. Weapons and tools, another example. Many examples of wood that was used for weapons and tools. This one is mock orange, Philadelphus lewisi. And the younger shoots would be used for arrow making. And so these also are managed by burning, because if you burn the plant down to the ground, it will come up with these longer, straighter shoots. And then older wood could be used for tool making or hunting bows. This image right here is actually an image of a quiver of arrows made by Ishi, the sort of famous last of his tribe, although there's some questions about that, I would say, that Theodore Kroeber and Alfred Kroeber wrote about in the 1920s. He favored hazel sticks for making arrows, so these may in fact be hazel, but I thought this was a really kind of cool image of that historical aspect. Okay, and last use that we talked about a little bit, ritual and religious uses. So this is the white sage, Salvia apiana, and the smoke from the leaves, so like a smudge bundle, would be burned for a spiritual purification ceremony. And the scent of the fresh or dried leaves is believed to have sort of calming, peaceful effects. There's several tribes that say you should put some white sage leaves in some water and drink a little bit every day. That's supposed to keep you peaceful and balanced. Fresh leaves or tea could be used for sore throats, congestion, so medicinal uses as well. And again, this is another one of those plants where the toasted seeds can be eaten. This is a really important plant to kind of talk about in terms of the current effects. So there's a lot of people in the Southwest who are interested in using smudge bundles for their own spiritual purposes. And unfortunately, what that's leading to is commercial harvesting and over harvesting, and kind of the sort of cultural appropriation, meaning like there's people whose cultural roots don't include this plant who are using it for their purposes. I don't necessarily want to like take a position on that either way, but I would say the problems that that's causing are that this plant's population is really jeopardized by that. And so I just would encourage folks to really think about like, how are you, if this is something that you want to participate in, given the fact that it's causing these problems. The last thing I want to talk about is that, and a commenter mentioned, I've been indiscriminately using present tense and past tense, and I should be using present tense for all of this because Native cultures in California are still here and active and working to revive and preserve and maintain ethnobotanical and cultural traditions, including languages. And so I wanted to mention a few organizations that I know of and have some connection with. One is the Amamutsan Land Trust. The Muwekma Ohlone tribe I know is hosting an event with the Peninsula Open Space Trust later this month, the California Indian Basket Weavers Association, and the Run for Salmon. The Wintu people in Northern California are doing a lot of activism around maintaining salmon runs in their tribal areas. So there's many active communities of people trying to continue these traditions. And I want to, obviously, like, I was limited a little bit by wanting to continue to use images in the public domain, but Native people are not just in grainy black and white pictures. Native people are here and now. And so there's a lot of organizations, and I have a bunch of links that you can look for. So some of these are sources I used in my talk, and others are, I think, important places to go to kind of see more about these different, the California Indian Basket Weavers Association, what's going on with white sage, the Amamutsun Land Trust, a variety of different organizations to check out if you're interested. All right. Whew. My voice is not going to thank me later on. Awesome. Excellent. Yep. As Stephanie says, Las Pilitas has a webpage of edible California native plants. And there's a link in the Zoom chat. Oh, I think you're speaking, and I'm not sure. I think you're.
Are you ready?
There
to
we
take
go.
Questions, Jane?
Definitely. Yeah.
Okay, great. One person on YouTube wondered, how do you fix the mugwort? And I think that she was actually asking somebody else who she was asking somebody else who mentioned that they liked mugwort, but I was wondering if you had any thoughts about fixing mugwort, like maybe it's a tea?
Like how to prepare. I would think it would be a tea. I mean, just like full disclosure, I've never done it myself. I just smell the leaves and kind of move on. But if you were going to, collect and dry some leaves, probably similar to the way you would make chamomile tea, steep a little bit for a few minutes and drink that. One really important thing to keep in mind, though, when foraging, and something that I would, encourage folks to just be cognizant of, is where you're foraging from. Are there pesticides in that area? If it's close to a roadside, you're probably getting some, yucky chemicals from cars, etc. So just being thoughtful about foraging safely. Let's see. Carolyn asks, can you toast other salvia species seeds, black sage, Cleveland sage, hummingbird sage? I would think so. Yeah. I know that white sage is also, you can toast and eat the seeds. Again, I've never tried it. I've grown sage minimally in my garden. One of the things that this researching more for this talk kind of did for me was I thought, oh, it'd be kind of neat to try some of these. Like red maids, apparently the seeds are very sweet and taste like candy. And I was like, oh, they do they? But again, I have a little bit of, I would say, like, I want to be ecologically responsible, right, in the way that I participate in any exploration. And so I also want to make sure that I'm not foraging from a population that needs to survive. Yeah, I haven't. Stephanie, thank you. Yeah. Has anyone tried Wapepa's Kitchen Native American restaurant? Cool. A sagebrush liniment for pain, Catherine says. There's a lot of research on it online. I've made it and it's very effective. I grow it in my home garden. Lovely. Is it like an oil-based sort of like a I've seen herbal like sunscreens or lip balm type things where it's more like a or would it be a tea type of a thing?
And I think at this point, it'd probably be okay if people unmute and just speak rather than typing into chat, because it may be hard for some people to follow the chat. So
Sure. Sorry,
Should
and
we
I'm
maybe have Jane? Yeah, we can unshare so we can all see each other.
yeah,
Perfect.
fabulous.
I'm posting a few other questions here. Hopefully they make sense. Let's see. So on the question of the mugwort, it was using mainly as ceremony. It's refreshing if you're feeling lightheaded. And Elizabeth mentioned, and an Ohlone elder told her, if you've been exposed to poison oak, you can crush some mugwort and rub it on your skin to help prevent a reaction.
Yeah, excellent point. Judy mentions no foraging is allowed on public parks in the Bay Area. National forests and BLM lands allow some collecting in certain circumstances, but those lands are not close to us here. Yeah. So typically also being aware of the relevant legal structures that are in place. Sometimes folks who have private land will allow, someone to come and pick a limited quantity of something.
Yeah, foraging in our own gardens is a great way to go. And I've done a few gardens which are specifically native edible plant gardens. And I know several other design professionals have done that too, which is fantastic because we can not have to worry about taking from public lands. I'm not seeing any other questions on YouTube right now. I think I caught most of them on our meeting. I thought it was a really interesting point, the distinction between European settlers not seeing traditional farming and so therefore not recognizing it as tended. And that kind of brings back all that we were taught, as young kids, that basically it wasn't tended. So I thought that was really great the way you explained that.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the things that Kat Anderson says in Tending the Wild is that in her interviews with native elders, many of them actually used the word wilderness in a negative sense. One man said, the white man really ruined this land. It's gone back to wilderness. And what he meant was it hasn't been tended properly. And some, basket weavers said, well, I can't gather basketry material because the burning hasn't happened or the correct kind of management practices haven't been happening. So it's really an interesting, I think cultural disconnect, right? Where the native people see the European groups as not tending the land the way it needs to be tended. and vice versa, maybe, so it's a really interesting, I think a mindset shift.
I didn't catch also if we talked about sort of seasonal movement, going from different places to different places during different times of the year to go after different food or uses.
Definitely. Yeah. So most of the cultural groups in California had two, sort of a winter and a summer place. And I think, again, outside observers looked at that and saw nomads, right? Or saw like people who weren't settled anywhere. And that's not at all what was happening. It was, there's a traditional spring to summer place and a traditional sort of fall to winter place to be. Actually, it should be higher elevation for spring and summer, lower elevation for winter time. And so they would have sort of an area for each of those seasons. Okay. Oh, my 6-year-old daughter asks, what about no mow May? Yeah. We had read an article about not mowing in May to allow pollinator friendly plants to grow in lawns. I would say it's certainly a step in the right direction, right? So, or at least in my opinion, it's a step in the right direction because, maintaining a perfectly manicured green lawn in our climate and ecosystems is probably not super ecologically friendly for a variety of reasons. If you've got especially native plants growing in your lawn, definitely, it's probably better not to mow those. I'm personally a bit conflicted about like, well, okay, if I have a bunch of Sonchus species coming up in my lawn, do I really want those to be part of the ecosystem in the future? Maybe not. I do think, the more, what would I say, the more ecologically aware people throughout the world can be, I think the better. And so if no mow may is a way to start a conversation with someone and say, hey, I'm trying to help the pollinators. Yeah, Stephanie says, or convert your entire lawn to California native plants, get a $2 per square foot rebate from the water district. Yay. Let's see, Carol had a question. It would be interesting to learn the irrigation methods so the book, and I hadn't done a ton of research on this, but the book mentions digging a channel to divert some water and sort of flood a specific area, typically to irrigate like a patch of tubers. So it's a little difficult if you don't have, like a full like pipe system, right? I think the big thing about water is also planting what is going to thrive in the ecosystem with limited water. And I still love my tomatoes too much. Go ahead, sorry.
I can add something really quickly to that, because when you think about channeling water and how perhaps that was one way to focus on how you might irrigate something, you can do that at home too. We have downspouts coming from our roofs, and we can channel those to certain plants, and maybe those are the ones that want more winter water to keep more water in the soil. So we can do some of that land sculpting ourselves in our gardens. There's another question here. Do native people use the California poppy for anything?
Yeah, what I read, it's possible to make a tea for what's got low concentration of sort of sedative chemicals. I believe also the seeds are edible. And Frank asked a minute ago also, are European honeybees different from native bees? And do introduced insects affect pollination of natives? Yeah, European honeybees are different in a few ways. A lot of our native bees are solitary nesters and not colony nesters like the European honeybees. I'm not sure if an introduced insect would cause a decline in the pollination of natives, except insofar as maybe if the introduced insects are out competing the native insects that want to pollinate the natives. What I do notice in my garden is, so we have a California poppy riot and also an arugula jungle because arugula loves to just go to seed and spread itself. I encourage the arugula jungle. I like it on pizza. But I do notice the California poppies almost exclusively pollinated by native bumblebees, and the arugula almost exclusively pollinated by European honeybees. If you were to set up a camera trap and look, the ratios are very, very different. So it's really, really interesting to kind of see where the native bees want to go versus where the honeybees want to go. Yeah. Yeah, great. Thank you. Judy says,
we had one person comment, native bees are more effective pollinators. Honeybees do compete with native bees and have been removed from some areas when possible, can be very damaging in wild areas.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm so used to teaching students who are always reading the chat just like I am, so I'm forgetting to read the chat.
And then Carol Peck mentioned, catch the water while waiting for warm water for a shower, and then use it to water your tomatoes or other food crop. Fruit trees are great for that as well. I was going to look up, we have a really great CNPS talk that was done in the past about native bees. So I'll see if I can hunt it down and pop it in the chat.
Awesome.
If I don't get to it, our YouTube channel can always be searched for all the different talks that we've recorded. I'm looking to see if there's any other questions popped up on YouTube. Elizabeth Smith asks, do you have a recommendation on the best bee house to have in the yard, since different bees like different spaces?
Oh gosh. I don't. I'm not a bee expert, unfortunately. I would say there's probably a lot of resources out there about what to put. I know we have some friends who have put a sort of a carpenter bee habitat. So it's got a lot of sticks of different diameters kind of set up in a frame. That's an example. Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, Vivian says, John Kehoe gave a great talk on bees. And it looks like you both have the same link in
Found
there.
the same one. Yeah, the John Kehoe
Fabulous.
talk, which is fantastic.
Yep. Arvind pointed out honeybees appear to have their center of origin in South and Southeast Asia. I didn't know that. Awesome.
I pulled all the questions from YouTube. I don't see any more on YouTube. Don't see any more on this chat. I think you're keeping up.
I've been teaching on Zoom for 2 years now. This is never thought I'd get to be good at that, but
we've all had to change. Yeah. Have you taught this specific subject with your regular classes, Jane?
A tiny bit. My third project, third and fourth projects, basically the whole last semester of my class, students are designing their own project and then executing whatever their project might be. So and this is one of the things I talk about as an option, especially because my students come from so many different cultures, and I think it would be really fascinating for them to research. You know, my grandmother in Vietnam did XYZ with plants, and this is like the ethnobotany of her area. And so far, I don't think I've had anyone fully take me up on that. But I'm hoping because I just think it's really, really fascinating.
Oh, and somebody else, Vivian also posted in the chat that Juanita Salisbury also gave an excellent talk on bees, and she put the link up there. And that can also be searched on YouTube. That's right. I thought there were several.
Awesome.
And I think someone suggested very early on that it would be absolutely fantastic to have even more specific talks on each of those different subjects you mentioned, each of those little pieces. Delving deeper into them would be absolutely fascinating. And there's a lot of research that could be done.
Definitely.
And potential to connect with, modern Indigenous people and further our knowledge and our connections in our living world today. That'd be great. So
I know that the Amamutsan Land Trust occasionally has volunteer days. And I imagine that they might be open to having people go and volunteer for land restoration projects, removing invasive species or other sort of projects that they're doing. And they're, I believe, in the Santa Cruz area.
There's actually one every third Saturday at Pie Ranch out on the coast. I've gone a few times. It's really a wonderful experience, and you can sign up for it through the Amamutsan Land Trust website.
Cool. Awesome. I've been to the barn dance. I've never gotten to the actual volunteer day. Awesome. Susan says, my bee box has small bamboo tubes. Yeah, that sounds like a habitat for the carpenter bees. And I know we have at least one person with us who keeps honeybees as well. And my husband actually used to keep honeybees.
Do we have a way to look up that link, Vivian, for what you just mentioned?
Yeah, just give me a sec. I'll go find it.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. I feel like I just read about that someplace too, and I'm trying to remember what publication that was.
And Carol says the same setup works well for mason bees.
Did you talk about the use of white sage possibly for bee nesting habitat as well? I visit the demonstration garden at Marshall Cottle. They have a really amazing native plant demonstration garden, and they've done some experimentation where they've actually trimmed the white sage down, and the white sage has hollow flower stalks. And so they're thinking, oh, if we trim these things down, but we leave some of the flower stalks sticking up, I wonder if we'll get some native bees nesting in there. So we'll see what happens.
Cool.
Yeah.
I know that dead trees are also really, really important habitat for larger animals, right? Certain birds really need, a snag to nest in. And so I think it's interesting how, again, there's sort of this, obviously, I guess if it's a trail where people are walking and you don't want like a tree to fall on the trail, it needs to be managed, but leaving as much as possible kind of a wildness to the ecosystems, because there's many species that use all these little niches.
So Vivian posted that link there in the chat to the Amundsen Land Trust and the Pie Ranch events.
Awesome.
I should mention, because I don't think anybody has unless I missed it, that anybody on the Zoom meeting who would like to save the chat can do so. There is a 3-dotted little icon down at the very bottom right. It's quite small. If you click on that, there will be a save chat option. Okay, let me double check to make sure we're not missing any other YouTube questions. I think we got it.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. This has been really enjoyable.
Thank you very much, Jane.
Yes, thanks, Jane.
Really glad you could join us, and thanks for bringing all your expertise and starting the conversation. And hopefully we can continue it further with more ideas.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks so much, everybody. I'm going to go help put the kids to bed.
Thanks,
Thanks, everybody.
Have a fantastic evening.
Yeah.